back in the early 70s, in the heyday of early pulling, when popularity was just taking off, actually all through the 70s and up into the 80s, things were more wide open. There was a lot of character in the tractors. A lot of the pullers themselves were more characters than we have now. They weren't wearing helmets, and nowadays you don't know who's on the tractor. All you can see is a helmet and a fire suit. Back then you could see their faces, expression on their faces. You could see who it was, what they were wearing. See them gritting their teeth or smiling or grinning or chomping on a cigar between their teeth, something. A lot of tractors had a lot of personality back then too, and some of the dominant ones. It was a wild and woolly time. There's a lot of crazy things out there. People had their own ideas about what would go up the track, and a lot of them worked, a lot of them didn't. There was, in the superstock class, there were a couple of names from the early days that stand out that you can't possibly think of tractor pulling in the superstock class in the 70s without bringing them up. And Dave Stangle, running the tractor known as Solid Junk, has to be at or near the top of the list of names that you would have to bring up in discussing the early days of pulling. Dave was a very colorful character, very popular puller with the fans and other pullers alike. He a lot of personality, smart guy, sharp driver, great competitor. The tractor Solid Junk is legendary. It looked like a piece of junk with a bunch of hoses and lines and solenoids and pumps and tubing going everywhere on it. And it didn't look like it should even start up and make it across the scales, much less go up the track. It was the brainchild of the mechanical wizard Ron Perry. He evidently had a lot of ideas about what could be used to make a Minneapolis moline run. That was his brand of choice, it seems. He built several. The most widely known and celebrated is the G1000 Solid Junk, campaigned by Dave Stangle. In the very early times of competition, I don't know if they were competing as early as 71, I'm not sure. I don't know, but it was in the early 70s. You may see Ron Perry himself on the tractor, guiding it up the track. But for the most part, in later times, competition, you'd see Dave Stangle on there almost exclusively. He had tremendous rapport with the pulling fans, and like I say, he was very popular with the competition also. Matter of fact, the super stocker that I have restored of Donnie Thomas's, Deer Power 1, they never even called Donnie Donnie. They just called him Bale and Wire. That's what was their nickname they had for him, Bale and Wire. He, I guess because he said that's all that holds his tractor together is bale and wire. So that's what they knew him as. They were friends for a long time, as he was friends with almost every other puller. And one time when Dave was pulling the Eastern Circuit, he had a mechanical breakage on Solid Junk. I don't know exactly what broke. Something in the engine. He had to take I don't know if he had a piston issue or what. I don't know. but he had to take at least one of the heads off and drop the oil pan. And Donnie Thomas was good enough to allow him to use his shop to work on it while they were having to work on it, make that repair so they could finish running the Eastern Circuit. And some interesting things about it. Donnie and Leonard got to observe some top secret things on the inside of the engine, and said they were amazed at how large the valves were. Said the heads of the valves were about at least 3 inches in diameter, the valves in the head. And Leonard was telling me he got down, looked up in there on the bottom end of it, and he said he was calling the connecting rods dog-legged, offset connecting rods. In other words, some of them, instead of being straight, going straight up to the piston, they would go up and then over and then up. So now we don't know or have any idea what the exact cubic inches were, but I'm sure they weren't keeping it to a minimum. And what exactly was meant by offset rods, I'll leave that open to your interpretation. I'm not going to try to tell you more than I know. We don't know how many cubic inches. This was before cubic inch limits on the engines. He may have had quite a few cubes in that tractor. The rules back then were you had to have a stock block for make and model entered. Of course, with a moline, that's kind of a different thing, because on the moline engines, your cylinders, your jugs, are separate from the crankcase. We'll call it the block, but I guess it's called the crankcase. You had your crankcase there, and then your individual jugs, they would, well, it'd be 2 cylinders a piece. On his tractor, he had 3 jugs, which were cast with 2 cylinders in them. Through switching out the different sizes of jugs and everything, you could have an 800 cubic inch engine that was using that'd be stock jugs from that engine for that Moline had built. I guess I should mention that Solid Junk, the G1000, was a propane powered tractor. A lot of the super stockers back then obviously were diesel, especially in the heavy classes. But this G1000 Minneapolis Moline was a propane tractor, LP gas. It would start and run on propane, but when the come time to pull up the track, it certainly would run exclusively on alcohol that was being injected. His fuel system, Donnie was telling me, he set all his nozzles up there over a 5-gallon bucket and hit the switch. He said it filled that 5-gallon bucket up in about 20 seconds. So with the amount of alcohol that was being injected into that engine through all those nozzles, he said it was quicker than having it under a faucet. It filled it up so fast. So anyhow, they got to see some things inside there that normal people weren't allowed to see. And Donnie was a good competitor with Dave. Of course, Dave with Solid Junk would come out on top 90% of the time, or better. Although I have seen some results where some of the Deere power tractors were ahead of Dave's Solid Junk, but it's not often. Dave Stangle had a tremendous lead in points, usually in the 12,000 pound class especially, and he was towards the top in the 9,000 pound class, super stock class, and very near the top in the 12 open, where he would have to be pulling against the big modified tractors with the Allison aircraft engines on them, 4 big V8s, turbine engines, all kinds of different tractors. Yeah, he would run right with them and be very, very competitive. Back to Dave and Donnie Thomas. I got some footage here of them going up the track. We see this is in the 12,000 pound class at the 1977 Spring Nationals at Buck. And we see Dave with solid junk flying out the end with a full pull. And right after him, coming up the same track, is Donnie Thomas on Deere Power 1. And he gets out the end with relative ease also. So they pulled together a lot. Like I say, Stangle, solid junk, was very difficult to beat. You'd also have to mention a young puller named Danny Dean from back in those days in the 70s and through the 80s with his 1066 Rooster. And those two would, I guess, have to be, in my opinion, and I think a lot of other people's, the most famous super stockers of that era. Now, you did have a lot of John Deere 4430s and 4230s with twin chargers on that were very strong too and ran well in the 9,000, 12,000 pound class. Gale Long had one, and Kenny Smith, Harold McQueen. They all pulled real well. And there were others too. And Alice Chalmers, you had John Lancaster. He had a 210, I think. Could have been a 220. And Bob Williams with his D21. There were other fellows with really strong Alice Chalmers also. But when Dave Stangle ran that thing right, it was almost impossible for any other tractor in the class to come close. One thing's for certain, the equipment to get all that horsepower out of solid junk was not bought at the local speed shop or ordered through a catalog. Let's just let Dave tell you in his own words.
Everything's about handmade on this, and very few things bought.
And it wasn't the easiest thing to run right either. There was no computer controls back then, no automatic anything. He had on his throttle hand, he had to flip a bunch of switches on the throttle as he was going up the track to turn on other pump solenoids that would pump more alcohol in as the load increased and put more boost in from the higher exhaust temperature from the load going up. It would put more boost in, and he would need more alcohol injected at that time as he was going up the track, and he had to anticipate and try to read things and flip them at the right time. And sometimes he didn't get it exactly right, and he might have needed to flip one a little earlier. There would be he'd have a detonation problem. It'd be a backfire, and it might blow some of the intake piping off the side, and it would be a loud boom. And it happened often enough that Dave got the nickname Dave Boom Boom Stangle, which is what they called him a lot of times. But he, as you can see from these results, he really had a lot of success during those years in the heavy superstock classes and in the unlimited class, pulling against the modifieds. He had a good streak going in the Indy Super Pull, held in Indianapolis, Indiana, in the Coliseum they had out there. He had, I think, from 73, 74, 75, 76, yeah, I'm pretty sure. He won the 12,000 pound superstock class, and he was on his way heading for the fifth one when had what you call catastrophic engine failure. had, well, the way they put it, suspicious rattle in the bottom end of the engine, and a bunch of steam and smoke and fire come out of the engine compartment. And that was it for him on that. But he had a long streak going there for a lot of years. And back then, pulling was like a family event. Wives and kids a lot of times would travel around as much as they could with their husbands. Dave was no exception, as we see in this picture. And here's another little comment from Dave about the joys of being around tractor pulling.
I mean, we have as much fun or more fun when we're not pulling tractors on the track as we do when we're out there.
Dave Stangle and Solid Junk captured many national points titles over the years, up through the 70s. He didn't change too much. He did finally have to go with a wide front end after a while. And they, instead of just the one big turbo, they had twin stage turbos up there on the top of the hood in a big rusty metal box. And he would turn the tires. But I couldn't find a picture of that. I know I got it, but I'll put that up in part 2. But anyhow, I just thought that would give you a little bit of an overview of one of the, if not the most famous super stock tractor from the early years, Solid Junk. I'm sorry to say I never saw the tractor, never saw Dave Stangle in person, in real life. And that's something I regret. I wish I could have. Just never happened. Solid Junk and Dave Stangle will forevermore be thought of as the most colorful pair, and certainly was one of the most influential competitors in the super stock division in the early formative years. We all miss him, and we miss the tractor. It would be wonderful if it could be restored back to what it was back in the heyday, the early 70s, mid 70s. I would certainly volunteer my services for doing that. I think we've proved that we can do accurate restorations and reproductions of super stockers from the early 70s. So if anybody gets a hankering to have it restored,